Welcome to the Jackie Scully Show. This is not your ordinary podcast. This is a space for heart-centered conversations, bold ideas, and transformative visions. I sit down with thought leaders and visionaries who are making waves in the world of heart, education, and consciousness. Together, we explore how we want to live, co-create, and thrive in 2025 and beyond. Every Friday, join me for inspirational and thought-provoking stories of everyday people creating extraordinary impact. These individuals are sparking waves of positive change, embodying the kind of impact we all aspire to create. This season, 3 powerful themes emerge: the heart of wholeness, exploring inner love, emotional balance, and our deep connection with awe; the future of education, rethinking learning through personalized pathways, collaborative growth, and community-driven transformation; and a new era of consciousness, expanding possibilities and how we live and thrive together. Come sit with me. Let's dream, build, and embody the world we wish to see. This is the Jackie Scully Show. Enjoy. Hello, and welcome to the Jackie Scully Show. Today we have Dr. J. Rodríguez. I'm so excited to have him on. So Dr. J says communication is at the heart of human connection. It is foundational. It is fundamental. For over 2 decades, Dr. J. Rodríguez has helped people become better communicators. His work cuts across boundaries in education, business, and contemporary culture to uncover how messages matter in the moments of living. As a professor of communication studies, Dr. J has received awards for the quality of his research from the National Communication Association, International Communication Association, and Association of Teacher Educators. His work has been featured on ABC 7 Eyewitness News, KMEX 34 Univision in Los Angeles. He has also found the time to serve as a trainer and consultant for public and private organizations across the United States, working to create compassionate solutions for social change. Today, with the mind of discerning scientist, the heart of an empathic coach, and a spirit of savvy strategist, Dr. Rodríguez is partnering with educators, business leaders, and community members to co-create uncommon solutions for common communication dilemmas. Wow, there's so much that you've accomplished and you keep accomplishing. So wonderful to have you on the show today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Jackie. It's always a joy to speak with you, truly.
Yeah. So before we get into kind of the topic of love and communication today, can you tell our listeners just a little bit more about you, your journey, your background, maybe more than what I just shared in the beginning there?
Of course, always a personal narrative, right? So my journey for me began in college, right? I was a lowly undergraduate student, taking courses, and I met my mentor, Dr. Ellis Hayes, who I speak about in my TEDx talk. And, it just changed my life. He was one of these larger than life type persons, right? And I remember walking into the lecture hall and being really blown away by his presence, his authenticity. And I recall that at the time he was putting together a training company. He was putting together workshops, retreats, and things like that. And I decided to go, and one thing led to another, and I ended up becoming a trainer for his organization. And when he passed away, he asked me to take care of his class, to take care of his legacy. And I've been very privileged to be able to teach that class today. So I think that that journey of honoring a legacy that someone left behind is something that we don't normally talk about these days. And I feel so privileged that I am living that legacy that Dr. Hayes left behind for me, and I am now sharing it in my own way. And that's part of what we're talking about today, this love journey of honoring the past, right? Being very present in the moment, and at the same time creating a future for the greater good.
Yeah, I think talking about that legacy, there is a lot of that mission of love and service and kind of wanting to continue to serve and, fill those kind of those shoes, if you will. And I wanted to have this conversation with you, and I love that you wanted to have this conversation because this whole new kind of podcast on my journey is to have these bigger conversations and what we really want to step into in this new era. And I really think there's a lot of people who are ready to talk about love. I don't know why it could be taboo, right? It's usually like not something you might talk about on a podcast, but I think it is part of how we want to share our mission and our service in the world. So, with that, where would you like to start? What would you like to first talk about with this topic of love?
Well, I think that there is this wonderful quote that I wanted to share with you from Rumi. And he says, "Heart is sea, language is shore. Whatever sea includes will hit the shore." And for me, this is a wonderful metaphor to talk about the heart as this ocean of possibility, and that we open our hearts. And the way we connect with other people is through language. And he puts those two ideas in this wonderful quote: "Heart is sea, language is shore. Whatever sea includes hits the shore." So we hit the shore of our hearts through language and connection with other people. And I believe that we do that through this process that we call love. I call it transcendence through ethical cognizance. And that's a term that I came up with when I was putting together the TED Talk a while ago. And you might say, well, what does that mean? It means going beyond ego by becoming aware of the roles that we play in minimizing suffering and enhancing the well-being of others. And when we talk about that, you know, people say, can we express that more poetically? And I go, well, yes, of course. And I like to say it this way: I surrender all of me for all of you so that there's nothing left but us. And what does that mean? There are three people in every relationship: there's you, there's me, and then there's us. There's that transcendent quality of relationship that you and I share beyond you as an individual and beyond me as an individual. So we create something transcendent in that we transcend our individual identity and connect with something larger, something bigger, and that bigger thing or that bigger reality is our relationship. And that's what what I talk about when I share this concept of love: to surrender all of me for all of you so that there's nothing left but us. And of course, I have my individual identity, you have your individual identity, but the idea is that when we live for something, when we connect with each other because of something larger than each of us as individuals, we really become our full self because we surrender to those moments of love. And this idea obviously isn't new. I go back to Viktor Frankl, who had this wonderful quote about success: "Like happiness cannot be pursued, it must ensue," he says. "It does so only as an unintended side effect of one's personal dedication to a cause greater than oneself, or as a byproduct of one's surrender to a person other than oneself." And that's a really powerful idea that we don't talk about very much these days. Surrender. I love that success, happiness is a byproduct of surrendering to a person, to an ideal, or to a notion, or to a principle larger than oneself. And I think that that is what we're talking about when we talk about love.
Yeah. And again, always blow my mind with how you speak. And you have to follow Dr. J on LinkedIn. His posts are all very poetic. Um, so I want to focus on surrender because that's something that I have talked about as well. And I do see this energy when you are surrendering to someone or to something, it really is this humbling, part of you
Right.
saying it's not about me, right? And it's really not fully about you, but it's about we're surrendering to this moment, this exchange. Even having this conversation today,
Yeah.
we're surrendering, right? We don't know exactly where it's going to go, right? We have some idea of structure, but really this is meant to be very unstructured, and you're just kind of surrendering to the moment, to the individual, and allowing for that exchange to happen. And I think that's really when the magic happens. That's where there is love. And I think kind of walking around the taboo of talking about love, love is just not romantic love, right? So
Correct.
two individuals sitting on a podcast talking about love, we're not talking about romantic love, but it is that full sense of stepping into your humanity, right? What it means to surrender and to connect with another individual. And you really have to step out of the ego. And there is that transcendence there, because when you step out of the ego and you just kind of go in the flow of the moment, it's almost like a meditative state. And then that way you are reaching like a whole other level of this type of connection. So I love that idea of surrender. It can be very difficult for people to do.
Right, because we're obsessed with control, right? And with process and with science and with iteration and all these different metaphors for control. And the bottom line is we're not in control. We do the best we can, of course, and we take action and we're thoughtful and we're purposeful and we make goals and all that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the bottom line is, as you said earlier, we are in this conversation right now on this podcast, and we don't quite know where the conversation is going. And the more we try to control it, the more we're going to get stuck in something that's artificial and inauthentic and it feels weird. And I always see these uh, manifestations on podcasts or conversations where they're overly scripted and someone is trying too hard or it isn't flowing very nicely. But on the best podcasts, like yours, and on the best conversations or talk shows or whatever, the conversation is relatively unscripted. Of course, there's a structure. Of course, there's an organizational flow, and there's some very common things that need to happen in a conversation. But in general, there's this awesome authenticity, this genuineness, this wholesomeness that is fairly unpredictable. And that's what people really like about podcasts, that they're conversational, not that they go off on a weird tangent that you can't track, but the fact that people are being real and you can get a sense of the reality of their humanity, and you're riveted because these two people are in conversation with each other. They're present and they're allowing the moment to unfold. And we're drawn to the surrender of that moment because we find it attractive. And for me, that is a form of love, of going with a process, surrendering to that perpetual energy of giving and receiving, and allowing that to happen for the greater good.
Yeah, because when you are in love with a person or anything, there is this sense of you have to relinquish control, right? You can't,
Yeah.
when you try to control, say, a relationship or something, that a project that you're working on, if you have too much restriction, then the love dissipates. It starts to, not really be there anymore. So just think about when you are fully in flow in anything that you love doing, when you're fully in flow connecting with a person through conversation, you just, let it all go and you're just in that moment. There's so many different examples of this. And what came to mind when you were talking is how we could bring this to organizations. Like something that's been swirling in my brain is this idea of love. And again, taking out just the idea of romantic love out of it. And how do we bring that to schools, companies, organizations, and say, how do we bring a little flow, a little surrender, take a little control out, because so many systems have so much control. and they're inauthentic. And
Yeah.
people feel that. People feel like they can't be themselves in that school, in that job, in that organization because there's so much structure. And the whole idea of love is super taboo. Like people are like, I don't want to talk about like personal things, in this, it's professional or it's personal. It can't be both. It's almost like you can't be human. You can't fully be
Right.
human when you put on your work clothes, right? And I think there's something that we need to kind of unravel that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's become this crazy bureaucratic system following hard science, prediction control, input, output, and that is a way of moving in the world. And it's very yeah, I'm thinking about the work of Ian McGilchrist, who talks about the hemispheric hypothesis, and he talks about left brain thinking and right brain thinking, and it's very holistic. And I'm summarizing it in a very basic way here, but essentially, as we know, the left brain tends to be very logical, very systematic, very much in terms of controlling and looking at very minute specialized information or data, which is very useful. And the right brain is much more holistic, gestalt, empathic, looking at the big picture. And this is in no way trying to demonize the left brain, but the idea is that we have allowed left brain thinking to dominate the way we move in the world. And he makes a very elegant argument in a series of books that there is really an interplay that needs to happen between right brain and left brain. And really, the right brain modality of being in the world and this big picture idea, this empathic idea, this holistic picture of the world should be the dominant force. And then we bring in left brain thinking to look at the details and the process and the steps and the strategies, which are totally important, totally essential. And then we bring back the right brain to say, now that we've gone through this strategy, now that we've executed this plan, does this fit within the larger picture, within the holistic idea of what's good for everyone, what's best for our world, for our relationship? So notice as I describe this, this isn't one or the other. This is yes and working in unison, working in synergy, working in combination, working in harmony, in a sense of flow where there is or there are two types of thinking or two types of paying attention, where we're paying attention to the big picture. We're looking at the steps we need to go through, and we go through those steps. And then we come back and we invite that big picture mindset to look and see if the process that we've gone through, if the flow or the procedure we've just followed is in alignment with the greater good. If it isn't, then we go back and we tweak and we go back to kind of a left brain thinking, do a different strategy, but then we check back with a right brain orientation, going back and forth in a flow, which I believe is a very loving way to interact not only within ourselves, but with other people.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. And I love that whole idea of the two hemispheres because I
Yeah.
taught psychology for a long time and always would talk about how there's this myth that you're a left brain or
Yeah.
right brain, right? Well, we have both hemispheres and you use both of them. You might lean into one or the other, but
Sure.
that they do need to be in harmony. There needs to be balance. There needs to be homeostasis in everything that's part of our body. And I like this idea of bringing in kind of the brain science to explain this notion that the right brain should be leading. It's also like the heart, right? The
Yeah.
heart should be leading. That is where you are following your true self and what you really want to do and accomplish. And it's also how you lead with love. So that's all, there's this intersection of everything you're talking about between like the hemispheres, brain science, but also leading with the heart, but then checking in with
Yeah.
the brain, checking in with the left brain to say, is this kind of the strategy? Is this the way I want to do it? And you're really just living an experiment, like life is an experiment and it's about, let me try this on, see how that feels, see if like, again, these strategies or the way of doing it feels right. And then you tweak it. And so I think that there needs to be more of this conversation of we need both and they need to be working together and not one over the other because we have lived in an imbalanced world
Yeah.
for a very long time that's been very, like you said, left brain, industrious, and then just in general, we really overemphasize like the IQ over like EQ and our emotions. Like we've been on one side for so long, and I think we're at a breaking point
Yeah.
that we can't just ignore the other side anymore because by ignoring that right brain or the heart, the soul, love, and making it taboo to talk about it, emotions, we are so out of whack that we're seeing what's happening, around the world. It feels very unhealthy and imbalanced. So, I mean, going really macro here, when we're doing that work and trying to have that balance within ourselves, then we are actually bringing that into the world. And then that creates more balance in the world. And this doesn't happen overnight, but more people that I think are becoming aware and awakened of this state of how
Yes.
imbalanced we are and saying, I want to take responsibility for myself because I grew up in an imbalanced world, myself is
Right.
imbalanced. We all are. We could just go ahead and admit that.
Yeah.
And then start to take responsibility of, well, I'm going to work on that and become more balanced because also it feels really good. Like I want to feel
It
good
does.
and the balance feels really good. And that's something then we can give back to others. That love comes from that space. And then we create more of that balance and that flow.
Absolutely. And what you were talking about, bringing it into the world, it's very difficult because it's an experience, right? And I think that you're speaking to that process of allowing people to experience it for themselves and then finding a way to tap into that experience over and over. So it becomes a practice. So it becomes a ritual. So here's a story that I share to help us surrender to the moment and have an embodied experience of what this love action or love in action feels like. So here's the story. Imagine that you're walking down campus or down the street and you see an elderly woman and she's clutching a cane in one hand and she's clutching a stack of books in the other. All of a sudden, she hits uneven pavement. She falls, she stumbles, she hits the ground hard. Her books go everywhere. What do you do?
Of course, you want to run over and you want to help her up. Yeah, that's your first instinct, right?
Your first instinct is to be caring for another person. Your first instinct is to show concern for another human being. Your first instinct is empathy, comfort, helping, right? And notice how that isn't about you. You're not thinking, oh my gosh, is my lipstick on correctly? Or am I wearing the right eyewear or whatever? None of that self referential content is coming up in that moment. In that moment, there's an extension outward to the otherness of the other, to be of service. Is she okay? Should I call 911? Can I help her up? Should I pick up her books? In fact, I'm going to go pick up her books. I might ask her, is she okay? These are the normal types of responses that I hear when I present that story to people in workshops or in trainings. And the point is, I always just make the clear point. Notice how the focus is on the other. I call this heart set. We usually talk about mindset, and notice again, very mind oriented in our traditional orientation, but this is a heart set, setting the heart, setting the inner beingness of our self outward, right? Through a series of very authentic movements that I think are very natural for most of us. This is a first reaction. This is a first response. And I always point that out to people. Notice how your first instinctual response is to be of service to the other. And if we put that into a series of questions, the questions are, who am I in this situation? What type of a person is needed in this scene? And for most of us, the answer is a caring person, a compassionate person. And then another question is, what's my intention or what's the purpose? Well, the purpose is to be caring, to be loving, to be kind, to be compassionate, to be helpful, to call 911, to reach out for this vulnerable person. Then the next question is obviously one of action. What do I do? It's what we call agency. What can I do in the world in this moment to be of service? Well, maybe I could help her up. Maybe I could ask if she's alone. Maybe I could ask if she has a phone with her and I could call a caregiver or her family. Maybe I need to call 911, and notice how those are all behaviors. So there's this question of identity. Who am I? Or what type of person is needed? There's a question of intention. What's my purpose or what's my intention? And then there's a question of agency, of doing something in the world for the other, with the other, for the greater good. That to me is love in action. And that story, I think, brings that out by allowing us to notice how we set our hearts by focusing on the other, something larger than the self, something larger than each individual person, so that we can then follow through in a state of flow, in a state of love, because that's love in action.
That's so relatable too. I love that exercise because, of course, many people would say,
Yeah.
I would go help her. Um, but if we went back to if we were only working from the mindset and not the heart set, love that, the mind would start chattering, going, well, it's going to make me late to class. I have to go in the opposite direction. That's what the
Mm,
mind starts to do. And the heart that's leading, talking about again, that right brain, the heart leading goes, no, this has to happen now. And this is part of my service because I care. And, the first thing I said was instinct. And then you
well,
reiterated that back. Instinct. The human instinct is to love. That is
yeah,
instinctual. So when we look at the world and we're like, there's just evil people or there's just evil things, I'm like, it is instinctual for us to love. How did we even procreate? You know what I mean? How
yeah,
do we continue on with our, generations? Love. Like it's part of our biology, it's part of our makeup. And that is a wonderful exercise because then you can blow that out again,
right,
macro about someone's life, right? Asking, who are you? What do you want to do in this world? What is that, like those steps, your agency, and what is your service? And then that way you're able to step into purpose. And I think a lot of people are missing their purpose and they feel lost. I think that's where a lot of mental health issues and concerns come from, especially with like younger people. We look at that in school, right? You work with college students. Like
yeah.
when people are like just unsure of themselves and they're unsure of their purpose. And if we could use that exercise and just say it's not complicated, it's really, really simple. If you take this one particular situation and then you blow that out to be your life, you can find what your purpose is. But it does take you going back to self and say, what kind of person am I? What is my identity? What do I want to be in this world? So I think that's brilliant. There's so much there in a very simple exercise like you just shared.
Exactly. And notice that I didn't intellectualize about it. I didn't give you a theory. I just gave you a situation. And the situation allowed you to experience that in your body, in your authentic expression. There was no theory, no bizarre intellectualizing of concepts and all this stuff. because that would take us away from the heart set. That would take us away from the moment. That would take us away from the embodied experience that we're talking about. And another issue that comes up, which you mentioned very nicely, is people are confused about purpose because they think purpose is this thing about out there in the future when I make $1 million or whatever future oriented purpose means. And I don't think that that is the type of purpose that we're genuinely talking about and that we're genuinely embracing when we talk about love. And don't get me wrong, those future oriented purposes are great about money and retirement and getting a job and getting a degree. All that is great. But purpose happens in the moment. With the elderly woman walking across campus, I couldn't have predicted that. I couldn't have planned that out. But in the moment, there was this spontaneous arising of the type of person I want to be, the type of intention I want to pursue, and the type of action that is optimal, preferable, helpful. Or even broader still, what type of person is needed in this moment beyond me? What type of intention or purpose is required by the humanity of this moment? And what type of action is essential in this moment so that the need of the moment is met? And notice how that's transcendent. That is not about me. That is not about my ego. That is not about how I look, but what is needed, what is being called. And then there is a call to action. I love this notion of the call, CALL. What are you called to do in the moments of living for
Mm.
the greater good? That's a very powerful thing. Not like, oh, I created my goals this morning. No, no. What is the call? And if we go back to the story of the elderly woman, we are called to care. We are called to love. We are called to be human beings in a process of connecting with another person for the greater good.
Beautiful. Oh, I love that. I love the call. The call comes from the heart, and just being is enough. And that's often talked about a lot in like the spiritual world is just to be that human in the world is needed
Yeah.
because instinctually you are love. And so just being that caring person that's your purpose. That is why we're here. We're all here because we all need each other. We all need each
Yes.
other because then we might be that person that fell down. And then someone's going to have the call to help us. And then we do the same. And it just keeps cycling around. And that's really how we are going to live in a peaceful world, right? If we all see our purpose is just to be that love, be that caring person, and that we do that for others and they do it for us, you know, beautiful place to be.
Exactly. And that is total heart set. I mean, total in the moment. What is the call? Boom. And I'm setting my heart. I'm setting the heart. I'm allowing the heart to set by answering the call. And it's this moment by moment, unpredictable, and surrendering is very important because, like you said in your wonderful example, oh my gosh, I can't help the elderly woman because I got to get to class. That is not surrendering to the moment. And don't get me wrong, getting to class on time is very important. I'm not diminishing that, but taking a moment to just say, hey, are you okay? Should I call someone? And then maybe making somebody else responsible. Hey, listen, I got to get to class, but could you help her? Because I got to go. That's still a moment of connecting with another person, being caring, and allowing that call to be met because you instinctually see a need that requires your humanity to be present.
Mm,
Boom.
yes, beautiful. Well said. I didn't know where this conversation was going to go today, but I loved every piece of it. And I had a feeling it was going to go somewhere pretty expansive. So thank you, Dr. J, for giving us those beautiful words. Any final thoughts before we end here?
The idea is simple, right? Going back to what we've been talking about, the call, having a sense of heart set and allowing yourself to surrender to the moment for the greater good. That's it. That's it. Period. Boom, drop the mic.
Drop that mic. Simple recipe about being a great person in the world and giving
Right.
love and having peace. Hey, if we could do that, we could solve world problems.
Exactly. Exactly.
Thank you
Absolutely.
so much. I am going to put all of your information in the show notes. Check out Dr. J, especially on LinkedIn. His posts are fire. I love them. And he will keep inspiring you. So, just like he does for me. Thank you so much, Dr. J.
Thank you, Jackie, and just a blessing to have you in my life. Thank you for inviting me on your show. You're just such a sacred, beautiful person. And, I love chatting with you because you get it, right? You get it. And we have these rich conversations because we're in alignment with this larger energy of the call of heart set, of being the type of person that is there for the greater good and doing that in ways that work. So thank you, thank you,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Oh, can say the exact same thing. Thank you so much. You're a blessing. Have a wonderful day.